Three, two, one. Hello. Let me do the view float on top. There we go. Hi. Hope not to get throttled. We're talking about. I hope to use better. There we go. We're talking about story again. I said I'm oscillating between the high road, the low road, the boots on the ground, the plane in the air. What is the subject we're looking at? I threw all these things at you in the last video so that you could see them as an arsenal for storytelling. You could say, hopefully you practice, said this isn't going to work. This JavaScript-based thingy from experiments with Google won't work, or maybe it will. Just the sense of experimentation is important. Okay. But what's in a story? What's in stories we see on Netflix? What is it doing to us? According to The Social Dilemma, it's subtly changing our own behavior. Jaron Lanier has the famous quote, they're not interested in your database, your cranky conspiracy theories or your love of guns or whatever that you might have. They're not really, these businesses are not into that, but psychologically with their AI, they're slowly turning you into more of the algorithm that they think they have. Just look at your banner ads, just look at your knowledge, your shopping history, so forth. This is a very subtle, behaviorally modified world. And the more you're aware of stories, the more you can pull yourself out of it. The more you're aware you've turned yourself into an algorithmic story, your narratives follow certain paths, the more you can hopefully gain a critical distance of it, with it, through it, before we get throttled. Okay, so as McLuhan said, the content of a new medium is actually an older medium. The content of film, early silent film from that era, was a couple different things. It was theater. We see many theatrical attempts. It was painting. It exists in a picture plane. And it's the light bulb. So the content of movies, apart from being about, as in D.W. Griffith, these very out there racist themes of the birth of the Ku Klux Klan, and what that's birth of a nation, and out of the Civil War, these grand budgets and so forth. The rather sophisticated means of doing this racist message in Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith, one of the first auteur level film directors, is what McLuhan said is the piece of meat that the burglar carries. For the dog of the mind, the watchful dog of the mind. So we jump at meaning and forget the means to which we are being presented stories. Stories on TikTok, stories in our own algorithmic loop, stories that are honing and defining and lining us up with what the machine thinks, what groups we should be in. And we saw it in the 2016 presidential election. We saw it before that, but it was a total surprise that a so-called class of people, a niche of people, suddenly learned how to organize on Facebook, and Facebook was saying, oh, this shouldn't happen. Well, how did that happen? We find tighter feedback loops of people unwilling to talk outside of that group, because as in the movie The Social Dilemma, this has been done on purpose. Niches are actually preferred by large corporate structures because then they can sell to them. And this is perhaps the death of French Revolution spectral um, spectral political behavior. We have left, looser, permissive, more egalitarian, with the right, more formalized, controlled, surveyed society. You're supposed to put your mind, your belief system on that spectrum. And, maybe you'll go to a Thanksgiving dinner with an uncle or an aunt who might be somewhere else on that scale. But I contend that it's more of a quadrant, that this spectral there are forms of left-wing totalitarian. We saw that in Stalin. There are many forms of control in that spectral belief, and then kind of underneath we have more loose structures. Left, right, more control, less control. So, and the postmoderns would say that the greater agenda of neoliberal capitalism, certainly the later, like Bifo Berardi and Bokyo Han and all these current philosophers, Zizek, kind of making swipes and dissing the ethos of the neoliberal capitalism, that it could seem left-wing, it could seem transgressive with an embrace of alterity, when actually it's just as conservative and tight as other. Okay, this is a talk about pedagogy in what we see. In 2016, the niches got with the niches and did not know the scale to which people adhered within the group. Surprise, surprise, Trump got elected. And this continues in storytelling, or something that is different, maybe not, from ditch digging or boots on the ground, or in the bars. As I said, we were working on the concept of the dance club, the nightclub, as a public mechanism to get over loneliness and alienation. All right, this is a front piece of film. When we look at film, we're seeing these things. We have realism, we have classical. I'm going to zoom in for the type. Professional actors, non-professional actors in the realism. The Italians perfected this in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Italo neorealist film. And we have formalism, heavily on special effects. Formalisms with all these superhero films where you're supposed to buy into the iconography of the superhero. I find them so banal, as I can't even think of sitting in one of them. But they affect a younger demographics, something like that. So we have types of film up at 12 o'clock. We have shots within that, within realism, classical. So we're mixing this up. The shots tell you extreme close-up, medium shot, full shot, long shot, POV shot, big things like Paranormal Activities or Cloverfield or Blair Witch Project is framing within the film to give start off as a documentary realist film, but really there's building a narrative with the second film. Angles is a perspective on the Renaissance perspective, where subjects exist within that. Lighting, high key, low key. Chiaroscuro is the Italian word for clear, darkness, things emerging from the darkness and receding back into it. Color, saturated, desaturated. Color is a lot. So all of these things, sound, editing, the choice of time, which there's no real editing in theater or with time-based, real-time-based things, even like VR and so forth. So the editing is by audience choice. Mise en scène is the background around it, the placement around the frame, face to the camera, frame constraints. This is the showing of space. The mise en scène in theater is usually the perspective, proscenium, the curtains go up, and there you are. So they'll choose lights around that spatial composition. Mise en scène in VR, it's anyone's guess. That's why I'm kind of liking it for the spaces behind and so forth. So these are stories coming at us every day on Netflix. If you check your net, I don't know what the average behavior is, but I think a lot of America loves, checks, love to hate, shows up for these online streaming services. Hulu, Netflix, Prime, Disney, cable channels went basically online. So every night, certainly every night during COVID, people sat there and took their minds off things by watching a story. What this story was doing, and we just came out of VPLs, visual programming languages, how to create filters between you and the story, or you are the artist pushing more of a story one way or the other, like we see here with the elements of making a story. You push and you pull. You have an agenda as an artist, and then after that you have to let it up to the audience. On a hard day, I come home and I do an exercise, a day of lecturing. I did it before. It was the smartest, stupidest film ever. The film that expresses its clever sort of commentary criticism in the form of dumbness or kitshness or double coding. Let's just call it double coding. It says something this way, it means something the other way. Double coding is what academics long have thought their province, what they're paid their salaries for, because the general public doesn't know how to do it. And they're partially right, but they're partially wrong. There are easy ways to discern the double coding in anything. We're talking about what you pull in from your lives. I find it particularly sad that the kind of curiosity for basic systems, basic canonic systems of the West, unlike the East and India and Islam and other cultures, like are eroding, so that people in grade school aren't reading or at least listening to Macbeth or Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet. Those are the top. Sometimes Julius Caesar. There was a core curriculum for this. Huck Finn, Moby Dick. These things end up like this. It's the content. The content of Birth of a Nation was and intolerance was basically these reactionary forces on intolerance was about the Protestant Reformation in France, starting with France, the Huguenot executions. And Birth of the Nation is about the KKK. And now in that, what D.W. Griffith used was sort of approaching a film on an industrial scale, apart from the little dilettante stabs that Edison and company made in the early films that were, trains coming at them, just one-offs. D.W. Griffith kind of caused the birth of the auteur. We saw that in Orson Welles. We see this in David Lynch. We see this in Quentin Tarantino. The idea of the comprehensive mind and everyone else are colors on a palette. Let's go from that. So let's pull so-called content aside for once. Let's go into a notion of we're out to crack the nut of double coding. We will get back to our tools such as CAD, SketchUp, VR in the form of spatial I/O, social VR. I'm having you do DAWs, digital audio workstation, to create kind of atmospheres behind that. Down there on the 7 o'clock position is sound. The dynamics of sound with DAWs, voices or characters. We put in a voice in one of our things. The sound made by props, music to enhance the action, familiar. Going around, I don't know why mise en scène is 1 hour to the high noon of types, but there it is. All the shots, angles, lighting, color, sound, editing go inside the box, which is the setting. This is why I like Tarkovsky films, why I like Peter Greenaway films, are all about the mise en scène. Uncle Julio, what's his face? Playtime. I'm forgetting the French comic actor's name. His settings are so specific and usually deal with him. Herzog, all these auteurs, even one could say Fellini with La Dolce Vita, and certainly with Satyricon, start with the mise en scène as kind of an actor too. For my urbanism class, I'm having them watch films about cities, the relationship of film to a city as a sibling system. I said in this, the internet is sibling to the city and the mechanisms that it does. The campus is sibling to the monastery and the factory. Has those things, but now are changing because of the influences, the stories essentially coming in. You learn, I just froze. You learn stories through about biochemistry, about math, and so forth inside the monastery. Let's go on. But here you are with the story coming to you. Lacanian mirror stage applied to the iPhone. Okay, you look at it. You're looking at your TikTok. You're looking at your Instagram shot with you and your beautiful intimate boy or girl. You're sitting at a sunset. You're having some margaritas, and you're saying, I want to show the world how beautiful my life is. Now, the world is your subscribers. The other, you see right there in the description, it's the others. The other, it sort of hovers out there as a generalized mass. But what are you looking at in your Instagram account, or even your TikToks? Or I'm not even subscribed to TikTok, and I get it on Facebook. So I get off on the rail of ADD land and try to go down that rabbit hole. But what I'm doing is actually looking in a mirror at myself. I get feedback. I get the gaze back. I show them beautiful sunsets, margaritas on the beach, beautiful partners. If I'm working out in the gym, one shows how beautiful their own body is according to this mise en scène. So you become the subject, but you become gaze back at what you think. The mirror reflects back the ego. Now, when you filter your margarita beach shots with beautiful people, the imago, the ideal digital self, is what you're aiming at. You have a thread of nothing but beautiful shots of you in swimwear, and it's reflecting back to this cloud of the other. What will people think? How will they be jealous? This drives, just like big fins on Cadillacs in the 50s, which we talked about in the Lear Earl piece, drives what we think is jealousy, but it has to go through this cloud of the other. But we have a feedback, we have the gaze. The ego is the button on the phone. I at least have this control, but that's formatted. The actual self is, the real self is the person who can say, shoot, I'm 15, 20 minutes into TikTok. I better get the hell out of here. So that's your actual self. But what is interesting is the reflection of the alienated self. We wonder why there is so much sadness and alienation in the world mirrored back to us with these little screens. We saw the structure of a film before, structure of a story. Here's the mirror to which you're reflecting back a story. When you go to a theater piece or when you go to a piazza in Italy, you have this organic flow of the other moving around you outside of the mirror. But the mirror can also be variable, and I catch myself when I'm on vacation or in a beautiful place, not to just experience the place through these mirrors, but to actually start living behind on stage, if that's what it is. Next one, it's kind of getting rid of the cell phone thing. We have the other hovering around behind the mirror, like architectural glass. It lets you smoke glass. It lets you see out, but it reflects a mirror version of yourself back. You give it. There's endless theory of the gaze. Males have it. Women. The old '70s Marxist formulation. By John Berger, in Ways of Seeing. Everyone read that book. Kind of a light Marxist view of gender and feminism. Or what I said, men watch, women watch themselves being watched, was his formulation of social conditioning in a capitalist world. Is it true? We've certainly, I hope so, mitigated that in saying that's not the only operation. Just look at, as evidenced on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, all these other things. We're all watching ourselves being watched, men included, that we have this, what social media has done is, to our stories, is pluck out the narcissist in us, but then, as you can see, that circle around it, the alienated identity. We see the gaze and the feedback to the gaze. The ego internal self is now stripped. So furiously, it's creating the narcissistic self just to furiously reconstruct a sense of the non-alienated ego. Imago is still there, the misrecognized ideal. Your beautiful girlfriend or boyfriend in their swimwear who might leave you the next month, break your heart. You keep focusing on this ideal with this reflection. It tends to not conjoin with the so-called boots on the ground world. Endlessly fascinating. I could talk about this endlessly. This Lacanian version, simple version of the cell phone. Why we now have these things annoyingly in subways and trains and public spaces where people are, there's a PhD in there. Why and how their level of empathy in their solipsism is not constructed the other in public, who are annoyed by their loud news reports or Bible channels or stupid twerking TikToks and so forth. Hi, I came back with the film. We made it out the other end. All right, so McLuhan, let me back up from here. This is McLuhan. You have a medium, VR, AR, is in the middle. We determine what it, and this is about getting in. I'm having you design online 3D forms to 3D print. We no longer have the labs at Stony Brook, the 3D labs, since COVID. Boo. But we can ship away to shape waves or nervous systems and have these things done. I've seen the most incredible things done that way. We have a medium, AR, VR. That's my new direction. And immersive environment. We put it in there. Let's put immersive environment in there. Like Art Tech House, like 4 projection systems, like even like escape rooms and Sleep No More, and create the immersive where you can't tell on stage, off stage. What it enhances theater, enhances film, it enhances a public space that's telling a story. What does it reverse? It reverses the tyranny of the little screen, getting down to this to get your information from. I contend we can get from this to these immersive spaces in larger towns. They're putting them up everywhere. LA, Miami, Washington, our Tech House has it. We have the Van Gogh exhibition. We have the Sistine Chapel. They've been doing this at the Armory for years. Immersive environments are nothing new. We've had these since basically the Middle Ages with the morality tales created in the town. We have this organically with the piazza function in Mediterranean cities, Islamic cities on the north of Africa. I've been to Morocco, and the sun-drenched piazza, the souk there, just fills up with 500,000 people at night as soon as the sun goes down. And there's stories, performances, fluidity, organic senses in that Moroccan souk. Plaza, Spanish it's plaza, Italian it's piazza, and it's a theater. It's a public theater. So that's part of what it reverses, is the collapse of that, or reverses the tiny little stupid phone. What does it retrieve? It retrieves full attention in an immersive environment. There's no offstage. You can't be a flaneur. You can't be a fly on the wall. What does it obsolesce? It obsolesces just this hypodermic needle theory of media, which is a response to McLuhan, I forget by whom, saying intention in media goes one way, the big broadcast idea of media. As we saw in the film, the behavioral operations of media otherwise take other forms in terms of you can't be a fly on the wall. At Sleep No More, you walk around with a mask, which is your final proscenium arch. This is why, out of a presentation of self in everyday life, the 40 sociologists, Goodman and Talcott Parsons and all these people talking about using the theater metaphor, that we put on a mask to shut down people. You put them on a mask in class in order not to be talked with. The flaneur position behind being a student, here we have it. You have my face here, but I don't know your faces. I assume you're listening. I can make assumptions, but I'm answering 2 to 3 to 4 times more repetitive questions this way. This is just new. This asynchronous thing is new, but we've had libraries and we've had other forms. Most education is asynchronous. My favorite Asimov quote of late is from him. The best a formal education can do is to train you to be an autodidact. You learn how to learn itself. That's a McLuhan-esque thing. Let's go back to mobile media AI. Means AI on your phone. Real-time connection, upper left, real-time connection to community sharing, equality making, authority ranking, market pricing. These are the 4 shifting operation by cloud, kind of an Übermensch, a super person. We saw it in the film Ex Machina, when Ava's loose upon the world. Upper right, as a reverse, again, as Enhance, reverse, retrieve, obsolesce. Enhance reverses normative ethics, techno-fascist ethics, techno-positivism, global tech tribalism, global technocratic standards. It's the tool as the foreground. It's reversing these things once we have the mobile media, because we could be sitting in an important class in the university and playing our TikToks, assuming we're going to get the answers from our roommate, and just the formatting of answers out of a STEM university is horrendous. In that it promotes the flaneur, promotes the factory worker who's just attending enough to the conveyor belt and then watching from the sidelines. This is, again, why I have you designing a nightclub instead of a theater show, because there's so much assumed on that this is going to be inorganic, it's going to be presentational in the theater, film, and so forth, whereas in a club, that initial color wheel of elements of the film are also elements within a club, an organic public space of entertainment, of meeting, so forth. All right. As in the great movie The Future of Work and Death, the techno-hubris, which some of the pundits were talking about, is that science will cure everything. It'll figure it out. Given 100 years and more bandwidth, it's going to figure it out. CRISPR, these two binaries is AI. So you're getting behavioral modification from your tiny little phone screen, which is your mirror, which you have idealized the cloud of the other, but you have an idealized ego on the other side, hopefully reflecting back, cannot reflect back. So the AI working for Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg, Gates, will push and pull you in certain ways. Pushed and pulled a polarized population to mistrust, distrust, react to what they thought was the deep government. And so AI pushed and pulled them those ways. Certainly after 2016, Zuckerberg was brought before a congressional committee and asked, what are your algorithms doing? In a sense, with greater critical thinking, you can not be a slave of this manipulation. AI is one of the dangerous bumps in the road coming up. Pervasive AI, if not already, and CRISPR. Age limit, congenital diseases, strength, beauty, intelligence, pervasive, inexpensive, pure interior use value. That's what it enhances. What it reverses is nominative ethic, biofascist ethic, techno-positivism, interior tools designed for superior human accidents. The human being, most animals, human beings, replicate their DNA with 10%, roughly 10% flaws. The other day I saw a horseshoe crab on the beach, and that thing is anywhere from 200 million years old to 500 million years old. So people, it's like, how is it? It hasn't really improved, but it does mutate over 10%. These accidents caused people to breed dogs, is a famous example, with that 10% mutation toward certain directions. Sheep, horses, cattle, domesticated animals have been pushed and pulled for tens of thousands of years. So in a way, biological engineering is not new. Farmers have been doing it forever. What else about this? But what it reverses is hopefully utilitarian ethics, racism, homocentrist perspective, man-based perspective, complex economic system, sex exclusively for pleasure. It's tweaking what took thousands of years can now happen in a couple engineered directions into germline editing within stem cells itself. Obsolescence, we have interior tool, design superiority, human accidents. There'll be no accidents. So that's the McLuhan square. That's how we can start to enter out. I did all of these notions of looking at the dotted line. There's the film. We look at the film this way, but to look at the operations on both sides was my version of what was going on with that Lacanian version of the cell phone. What is it mirroring? What is the ideal self on the other end? And we do have the idea. We have the object, protagonist, the woman, the antagonist. We see the ideal chess game before that. We see the real sort of making it to the film. These are my ideas. Freud, Metz, talking about viewing familial structures. This is Metz, id, ego, superego, floating around in the real world, id, ego, superego, floating around in the imago, the crashing, the barrier, the mirror of the other, the idealized other, the fearful other. Frantz Fanon talks about this in both his books, Wretched of the Earth and Black Skin, White Masks, about that division of the other, making it through that mirror to the other side to really see the individual beyond the cliche. Mulvey, feminist writer of deconstruction and feminism, talking about the male ego, the Freudian system built on constructs of the male ego, that there are other, the imaginary, symbolic, and the real. She took Lacan and redid this and saying we've had systems of vision that have been, this is second wave feminism basically. The school that the social conditioning in films and TV are tweaking women's opinions of themselves one way or the other, certainly tweaking men's visual pleasures from the gaze up and down the scale of control to freedom. And that, to unpack this is to unpack even the sexist critical ways in which this has been done through Freud and Marx, and now has to be done through seeing this mirror of the other penetrating. Here's Marc, Althusser, Lacan, the self, this idea of the vanishing point, illusion of empowerment against the rehearsed, the joyful, infantile mirror stage on the real side. Benjamin, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, is saying this magic thing, like Kant through Heidegger and Wittgenstein, saying, well, we can't talk about that content because it will remain elusive to language, being pinned down by language. So Benjamin said, let's just say it's an aura. And aura is that thing which withers in the era of mechanical reproduction. So he's talking about reproducing reality, one of the first persons, Benjamin, predicated on Marxist dialectics of master-slave, also the wage theory of value, that only the next to the exploited wage power of someone punching out fenders at Detroit is putting their alienation into something, and increasingly the profit motive is going to be based on how they waste their lives punching out fenders at Detroit. Bergson, realist, formalist, postmodernist. Postmodernists will say that these grand narratives, such as Marxism, Hegelianism, Freudianism, all these modernists, so-called, and they're only modalities, have betrayed a concept of progress in society. There's no such thing as progress. We shall bring down all the big narratives which were designed for fraternity, égalité, liberté in the French Revolution. And it's basically, we have to admit, a nihilist response. It did allow for queer studies, third wave feminism, Paglia through the late 90s. We're kind of in fourth wave feminism. That these people rally in their little encampments. Modernity itself is seen as suspect, and even a document of totalitarianism, as what was the quote? I forget the quote. Any document of civilization is also a document of atrocity. The idea of using IBM punch cards to efficiently send more prisoners to the concentration camps is a case in point that the final analysis of the content was elusive, so you deal with the form. The postmodernists say, look what modern architecture wrought for creating a vacuous landscape. We used it in Lear Earl, saying, look what the modernity of progress really is. It's nothing. It is the biggest illusion ever. There is no such thing as history as a secular atheist ideal, because in a puff of wind we can turn it into concentration camps, carpet bombing, decision to use the atomic bombs, even though they're based on decisions of how many men would have been lost, invading Japan. All these things were a reason to the postmodernists that this is not cool. Realists, let's go on. Barzan. This is, again, looking at that big color form flower in the beginning of film. Marxist critique of formalism say, hey man, it's not organic, doesn't come from the bottom up. Brecht and Boal, hey, even the Greeks were transformable. There's nothing tragic about eternal forms, because there are no eternal forms. Film is truth, machine. Flux, post-structuralism is away from the postmodern nihilist way and saying, let's look for the double coding even in those horrible superhero DC comic films. What's being done here is stupid Star Wars films. We can still see a double coding, and so forth. So if this is La Dolce Vita, kind of exhibiting an Italian male life, in all Freudian way that all these women, ideal and real, built up in this guy's narcissistic Mastroianni's, Fellini's idea of the mother, lover, confusion, the derailment of the family structure in World War II in Italy. This perhaps is why it's a commentary against an Epicurean life that leads to emptiness and misogyny and sort of a denigration of the mother form, playing with the concept of the mother-son notion in Mediterranean societies. This was it. This was cinema paradisio, set in Sicily, what films were actually doing as a media form to towns, to a real impact about showing the otherness of lands far away from a simple little Sicilian town post-war that needed to be transcended. Cinema paradiso. Big picture, old school system was a pyramid scheme, energy focus upward. Pyramid scheme did not focus on usefulness, but on future speculation. What can we speculate about buying a house to live in, but we're living in it as property, which is proof of our ability to get rid of it, to sell it. So are we living in our house as we would see the otherness of the next buyer, whom we hope to sell this house with a profit, and so forth. Further, misinformation, coercion, herd mentalities, bullying, authority, addiction are the modes of conduction of basic information, the status quo. Religions used to be pre-lit forms of thinking yourself in these hierarchies, but always returning to hierarchy. We have a sense of freedom with our cell phones, but we're just as tightly leashed in with those, with our breaking these, 5,000-year-old hierarchies. But we live in what is called the long tail, the power law, this idea that trends blip us through, black swans happen in our lives, happened with COVID. We stayed inside, we have all of that, but the long tail after that event is that tail that we're digesting for jobs, identity, intimacies, and so forth, just whittling away at that, whatever's out there with reality. Whereas television, movies, films created a response to the bell curve. How many men do we need to fight a war in World War II, in both the Pacific, two-front war, Pacific and Europe? These were questions that obscure the greater ideas of autonomy, freedom, freedom from war, things like that. This is life in the long tail of human dignity and possibility. There you go. Vietnam entering of a war in a far-off proxy place. Soviet Union, China came into this war too on the other side, supplied them with arms. We dumped billions and billions of dollars into this small, formerly French colony, and every night we could see how the expenses, the fancy machines, the gadgets, the use of the Bell helicopter as an insertion point for troops going out after hearts and minds. Why were we even there? We saw our working class boys mowed down. Nasty 7-8 year war as a proxy. Again, this transistor radio McLuhan device that changed everything. Unemployment rates, you can see technological advances. In 1970, you see the oil crisis, smaller cars, then back to bigger cars, and then you see this oscillation. The gold standard, it even gets to this. The fake gold standard, which promoted the cryptocurrency gang, usually young, saying everything's fake. There's no gold backing it up since Nixon. This is unhinged standards and caused these radical swings in economy. Nixon got rid of it because the American currency as the currency was becoming under attack by other. The pound was making a return. Japanese yen, all these other influences on the speculation of the pound, of the dollar. He wanted to put the dollar back into a psychological currency, so therefore he unhooked it from gold. And it was about fiat currency. Bitcoin, fiat currency. We know we've had the recent collapsing. Money is interesting as a McLuhan-esque object item in this. Let's go on back to stories. Here's the hero's story and the heroine's story. We're in the ordinary world, we go into the special world. The special world is sometimes accompanied by a helper, sometimes by elixir. Coming around the other side of that we have this threshold of adventure, tragedy, mystery. Tragedy could be getting kicked out, having a close person die, losing a love interest. And that leads down usually to the underworld, where you find the axis mundi, the axis of the world, which is very different than the world navel. Pretender's Return recognizes resurrection in this clockwise way. Brother battle, dragon battle, dismemberment, crucifixion, night sea journey, whale's belly, hell's gate. That in this mystery, we have reign and death, something happening. Same thing in King Lear. He's lost his 100 knights, and then emerges on the heath, returns. He has his initiation, even as an 80-year-old former king. His initiation, trials and helpers. He's got the fool. Rick said that the fool and Cordelia are often played by the same actor in Elizabethan England, which makes it. They did it in the movie where the Cordelia's moved on, and he refers to her as his fool. Interesting. And we have the initiation back into some sort of reality. We have a labyrinth, Scylla and Charybdis, the two monsters on the side of Straits of Messina. Salmon leaps, as in the Quatical Indian narrow path, riddles, monsters, ordeals. In Potlatch, the two big Quatical, no, I'm saying that wrong, but chiefs who are there to get rid of their wealth in front of the community. This is the initiation. This is the way into the mystery, from the simple tragedy of killing your father, marrying your mother, to the initiation where in Pacific Northwest, Native Americans, where salmon are a common thing, they subscribe to the mystery of giving it all away, destroying it. But this is the same mystery of destruction in Vietnam. Dump billions of dollars in this country. It doesn't matter if babies are dying. It doesn't matter if their leaders are corrupt, puppet government you put in there. It doesn't matter that Ho Chi Minh actually admired the founding fathers of the United States. This is a place to dig a hole in the jungle and dump our gadgets. And dump they did. And dump they did in Iraq, first Desert Storm, Iraq 2, Afghanistan, proxy war in Syria. Wars are not to be fought and won, like the Quatical chieftains. They're to get rid of this oversupply of mystery. The mystery of money, the mystery of meaningful employment, the mystery of as I said yesterday, people, Campbell quote is, people don't want to abstractly theorize on meaningful life. They want to feel complete living. So you come out the other side: departure, attempted murder, wound, escape, summoned to adventure, summons extraordinary, conception and virgin birth. George Lucas actually had a special room for Joseph Campbell, to be taken with a grain of salt, but it is an articulate trope, the trope of the hero with 1,000 faces for writing and reading. Back to my tropes of looking at film sideways. Oh, my complicated thing. Back, want, can, no, must. Individual restricting, social urging. Heroes, cheesy little graphic, supernatural aid, helper, mentor, temptation, the elixir, the mentor. Famous one is The Master Builder by Ibsen, where the architect, who's not really an architect, but he succeeds as the master builder, has a helper show up in the form of a beautiful, young, intelligent woman, his muse, whereas his marriage is going down his bourgeois underpinnings are going down the tube. Ibsen always writes about bourgeois assumptions of the middle class, the rigid algorithms of the middle class, and how a character can break out of that somehow. Music, dance, visual arts, theater, film. This is, again, my go-to explanation of why, how, what, when are we putting these new forms of storytelling. You're going to be doing this in social VR. That's your ultimate. We shall leave off at that. Here's the Aristotelian square of oppositions, which is also McLuhan-esque square of understanding a media. We'll leave off there.